Welcome back to ILTV News. As we open our broadcast, the State of Israel is wrapping up Holocaust Memorial Day, where we honor the memories of the 6 million murdered Jews by the Nazi regime. ILTV's Devil Klein breaks down the day's events.
That just there was the Holocaust Remembrance Day siren. People are only now getting back into their cars and continuing on their ways as an entire nation comes to a standstill at 10 a.m. on Holocaust Remembrance Day to commemorate the memories of the 6 million Jews massacred in the Holocaust. The rest of the day is planned with programs and special events for the day. But let's take a closer look at what is expected for today and what was last night. Last night's Holocaust Memorial evening kicked off with the Western Wall lighting up with the text, "We will never forget." Down the road at the Yad Vashem National Holocaust Museum, the annual procession was taking place. Attended by politicians, Holocaust survivors, and other officials, the ceremony included the lighting of torches by survivors and these words from Prime Minister Netanyahu.
התחייבתי לא נאפשר לאיראן לפתח נשק גרעיני. וכראש ממשלת ישראל הבטחתי לא תהיה שואה נוספת. השנה מימשנו הבטחה זו הלכה למעשה. הנחתנו על משטר האימים באיראן את המכה הקשה ביותר בתולדותיו.
In the morning, a 2-minute-long siren at 10 a.m. brought the country to a halt to honor the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Later in the day, the March of the Living ceremony took place in Poland at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Site, bringing together survivors and participants from around the world. Today, we remember and honor the victims, fulfilling the everlasting promise of remembrance for the sake of the Jewish nation, the State of Israel, and those who lost their lives to the very threat still seeking to destroy us today. We will never forget and never forgive.
The United States has now imposed what it describes as a maritime blockade on Iranian shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, announced after the collapse of high-level negotiations in Islamabad over the weekend. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is fully backing the move, and the Islamic Republic is vowing to resist. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz has the latest.
The U.S. military says the measures now in place include restricting vessels entering or leaving Iranian ports while allowing international transit through the strait under strict monitoring. Iran has rejected the move and promised retaliation. A Revolutionary Guard spokesman warned that new methods of warfare could be introduced, while an Iranian military official said no port in the Persian Gulf or the Sea of Oman would be safe if Iranian shipping is targeted. President Donald Trump said the move is aimed at cutting off Iran's oil export revenues and increasing pressure on Tehran to accept American conditions for ending the conflict. Overnight, President Trump confirmed that the blockade was now in effect.
Has the blockade started, sir?
Yeah, started, 10 o'clock. We can't let a country blackmail or extort the world, because that's what they're doing. They're really blackmailing the world. We're not going to let that happen.
Trump was emphatic about the nuclear issue.
Iran, you marking it down? Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. And we agreed to a lot of things, but they didn't agree to that. And I think they will agree to it. I'm almost sure of it. In fact, I am sure of it. If they don't agree, there's no deal. There'll never be a deal. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon, and we're going to get the dust back. We'll get it back either. We'll get it back from them or we'll take it.
Prime Minister Netanyahu gave his full backing for the U.S. blockade and for the strong U.S. position for the removal of all nuclear material from Iran. Pakistan is proposing that it host a second round of talks between the United States and Iran in the coming days, ahead of the expiration of the current ceasefire. Officials in Washington have said that while the first round of talks ended without an agreement, they were part of an ongoing diplomatic process rather than a one-time effort. The push for further talks comes as mediators seek to prevent a resumption of hostilities once the two-week truce expires.
In Washington, direct talks are now underway between the ambassadors from Israel and Lebanon. At the same time, IDF forces are in what may be the closing stages of a battle to capture the key Hezbollah-controlled town of Binjbil. ILTV's David Matlin has the latest.
Officials tempered expectations ahead of a historic meeting between Israeli and Lebanese envoys taking place at the State Department. Israel's ambassador to the U.S. is meeting his Lebanese counterpart and what will mark the most senior direct engagement between the two countries to date. Now, the U.S. State Department meeting with American mediation includes senior U.S. officials led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, highlighting the diplomatic push to pause the fighting on the ground. Hezbollah chief Naim Qassem is demanding that the Lebanese government cancel the talks as pointless and opposed any direct engagement with Israel.
هذا التفاوض إذعان واستسلام وتجريد للبنان من قوته. نحن ندعو والفرصة لا زالت متاحة إلى موقف تاريخي بطولي بإلغاء هذا اللقاء التفاوضي.
Now, the ground offensive in southern Lebanon is continuing, with the IDF saying it's close to completing the capture of Hezbollah's historic stronghold in Binjbil after weeks of intense fighting. The military says more than 100 Hezbollah operatives have been killed in the operation, with forces from the 98th Division, including paratroopers, commando units, and the Givati Brigade, leading the advance. According to the IDF, troops first encircled the town to cut off reinforcements and escape routes before launching a ground assault supported by airstrikes and special operations. The military says dozens of terror infrastructure sites have been destroyed and hundreds of weapons located as clearing operations inside the town continue. Binjbil has long been considered a symbol of Hezbollah power, including as the site of a major speech by former leader Hassan Nasrallah after Israel's withdrawal from southern Lebanon in the year 2000. Military officials say it may take several more days to complete operations in Binjbil and fully secure the area. In parallel, the Israeli Air Force struck about 150 Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon over the past 24 hours, including rocket launchers, drone units, weapons storage sites, anti-tank positions, and command centers. The IDF says it also targeted cells planning attacks against Israeli forces. No strikes were reported in Beirut since Wednesday night, amid international pressure to limit operations during diplomatic efforts. Prime Minister Netanyahu explained the strategy.
הדבר הראשון זה שהם מרחיקים את האויב מהגבול. ואנחנו לא מדברים על 5 נקודות, אנחנו מדברים עכשיו על רצועת ביטחון מוצקה, עמוקה יותר, שגם מונעת את הסכנה של הפלישה וגם מרחיקה את איום הנ"ט. הם גם מטפלים בכפרי הטרור שהיו צמודים לגבולנו, שם כל עמדת טרור ורבות הן פשוט משותחות. וכמובן, הלחימה נמשכת, לא נפסקה, היא נמשכת כל הזמן, ואתמול היא התרכזה וגם היום בבינג'ביל.
Amid the fighting, the IDF announced that Sergeant Major of the IDF Reserves, Eyal Uriel Bianco, 30 years old, from Katsrin, of the 188th Barak Armor Battalion, was killed in southern Lebanon amid the fighting with Hezbollah. Now, the military says that 3 other soldiers were wounded in the same incident, one of them moderately, the others lightly. They were evacuated for medical care.
Northern Israel has come under repeated rocket fire and drone attacks from Lebanon over the past 24 hours, with multiple barrages targeting communities across the Upper Galilee. Most of the projectiles were shot down or fell in open areas. During a barrage of fire from Lebanon towards the western Galilee, Carmiel was heavily targeted and a building in Nahariya was hit. Magen David Adom teams were dispatched to the scene and conducted searches, providing medical treatment to a woman in her 60s who was lightly injured by glass shards and a blast impact. There was extensive damage to the building and surrounding area. Amid the U.S. ceasefire with the Islamic Republic, dozens of rockets and drones have been launched by Hezbollah into Israel every day. And now joining us to discuss the current situation with the ceasefire is retired U.S. Brigadier General Robert Spalding, the former senior director of the National Security Council and the current CEO of Semper AI. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. Pleasure to have you on. To start, what do you think of this recent move by President Trump to blockade the Strait of Hormuz? What's the strategy here, and can it work?
Well, if you put it in the context of what happened in Venezuela, they're slowly creating a stranglehold over the economics that have allowed the financing of terror to go on in the Middle East and around the world for so long. And so I think this is part of a broader strategy. At the center of it, and, although Iran is currently in the crosshairs, is China, and China is really supporting a lot of the things that Iran was doing, and of course, supporting Russia and Ukraine. So it's part of a larger strategy that continues.
Well, we also see now that the U.S. is claiming they will return to talks at the end of this week. Does that mean that the position of the Islamic Republic has changed, given how we saw the last wave of talks, fade?
You know, this takes time. Of course, the Islamic Republic will have to feel the pain before they decide to negotiate. Every negotiation requires leverage if you want to get what you're looking for. It doesn't have to come militarily. It can come economically. And that's really where the closing of the strait comes into play.
What is the impact economically of this closure of the strait? I see a lot of people asking, well, if it was so bad that the Islamic Republic blocked it, why then would President Trump implement a naval blockade? Can you explain a little bit about that for our viewers?
Sure. They were blocking it, but they were also charging a toll for ships that were passing through. And so I think what the president said, if the ships are paying a toll, then we're going to block those ships. And any ships going into or out of Iran, we're going to block. So essentially what the president said is, no, you can't use the Strait of Hormuz as a way to make money. You can't either charge tolls or use it to sell your oil to China. So essentially, it's an economic blockade that's being enforced by the U.S. Navy.
Now, I want to ask you a bit of a hypothetical question, but if a deal of some kind is struck between the United States and the Islamic Republic, what does that mean for terror proxy funding? Because obviously one of the demands we see from the regime is sanction relief. Would some of that funding not also increase the funding for terror proxies in the region?
Well, I think the Trump administration is wide-eyed about what Iran or the Iranian regime intends to do with the money. And so I think there would probably be conditions placed on any releasing of funds that go into Iran. You know, I think what happened before, certainly during the Biden administration and prior administrations, is just an inability to deal with Iran, the regime as it is. You know, we made up things in order to justify what we were doing. That is not the case with the current administration. So I don't really see the Iranian regime having much of a leash to go out and do the things that we're doing prior to the bombings that have occurred in the country.
Well, I certainly hope not, both for the sake of Israel and all of its neighbors, as we've seen in the past couple of months. I do want to ask you, though, President Trump has spoken of an international coalition to enforce this blockade. What do we know about that? How is the international community responding to Trump's recent moves?
Well, I think you're going to see like UK and France opt out, but I think there's other allies coming to the front. And it really demonstrates how, you know, after 30 plus years after the Cold War, how the alliances with the United States are shaping up in terms of who's really part of the free world and who is essentially standing on the sidelines. And for those that are standing on the sidelines, I think increasingly they're going to be left behind in not just our military relationships, but also our economic and financial relationships as well.
Now, we're seeing direct talks between Israel and Lebanon for the first time this week. What is the potential of these talks, and how likely do you think it is that some kind of agreement is reached between the Lebanese government, which is still going to have to contend with Hezbollah, and Israel?
You know, I think if you look at what the United States has been doing, you know, there is definitely a new sheriff in town. And so this is having impact across the world. And I think it impacts the relationship between Israel and Lebanon. We're just not going to stand for what we've stood for the past, 30 years. And I think the change is evident everywhere. We're seeing changes certainly in our hemisphere, but around the world, you're going to see increasingly things that have been going wrong or bad actors that have been getting away with it are going to be dealt with. And I think, Israel and Lebanon is a good example of that. Without the support of Iran for Hezbollah, Lebanon is going to have to become, forced to come and negotiate with Israel.
All right. Well, hopefully we can see a resolution to that with as little violence as possible, both for the Lebanese and for the state of Israel. And of course, justice for the American lives that have been taken by that terror group, Hezbollah, which many people seem to forget about. I want to thank you for your time today, Robert Spalding.
Thank you.
Deep underground in Jerusalem, in fortified operating rooms, intensive care units, and maternity wards, doctors and nurses urgently treat patients, even while rockets are flying and sirens are blaring. Hadassah built these hospitals and is working to rapidly expand these underground facilities. Additional hospital beds and 6 advanced operating rooms are urgently needed. Please go to hadassah.org. Make a gift that helps Hadassah continue its long-standing, life-changing support of the Israeli people. Thank you.
A new revelation by Iran Wire exposes the man behind Iranian Parliament Speaker Ghalibaf's social media trolling of the United States. And it's being done from inside America. Let's take a closer look.
It started with something strange. In the midst of war, the Islamic Republic Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf suddenly began posting in fluent English on X, using snarky cultural references, internet slang, and even Gen Z-style memes aimed directly at American audiences. The post warned of economic collapse, mocked U.S. leadership, and tried to shape how Americans view the war in a way that raised suspicions. Now an investigation by Iran Wire has identified the person behind that messaging, Maysam Zamanabadi, an Iranian who's been living in Glendale, California for nearly a decade while simultaneously working as a media operator for one of the most senior officials in the Islamic regime. This comes as the U.S. State Department has in recent days moved to crack down on family members and associates of the regime officials living in the United States, including with arrests and deportation actions. But this case goes further. Iran Wire reports that Zamanabadi was not just a sympathizer, he was a formal insider. He was previously identified as a key advisor within Ghalibaf's inner circle and has had roles linked to state-affiliated communications and media networks. During the recent war, while Ghalibaf himself disappeared from public view, his social media accounts continued to push daily messaging in English to target Americans directly. These posts, with their fluent English and deep understanding of American culture, now appear to have been written from the United States. The investigation also found that Zamanabadi continued to promote regime narratives in private, praising the Islamic Republic's performance in the war and describing the United States as a declining power. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf himself is not a marginal figure. A former IRGC commander and current Speaker of the Parliament, he has been directly involved in the regime's security apparatus and its crackdowns on protesters. The Islamic Republic, a regime responsible for brutal oppression at home and the funding of terror proxies abroad, has long invested in information warfare. What this case reveals is something far more concerning for Americans, that it's occurring on American soil. The man with documented ties to the regime is a former employee and advisor inside its political system, living comfortably in the United States while helping shape its messaging to Americans.
In Gaza, the IDF and Shin Bet struck an armed Hamas terrorist cell, advancing imminent attack plans against IDF forces in central Gaza. Among the eliminated, an operative who was part of the cell that fired anti-tank missiles at buildings housing IDF forces and at a tank securing them, an attack that resulted in the deaths of 21 IDF soldiers. Additional Hamas operatives were also eliminated in the strike, including an elite terrorist, a cell commander, a Hamas police officer, and 3 additional operatives. The IDF says the elimination of Bishati marks a significant closing of the circle in response to one of the deadliest attacks against its forces during the war. Prime Minister Netanyahu has congratulated Hungary's Peter Magyar on his electoral victory, while also paying tribute to outgoing Prime Minister Viktor Orban. In a post, Netanyahu describes Orban as a true friend of Israel, saying he stood firmly by Israel in the face of international criticism and supported Israel during its war of self-defense against terrorists. He added that the people of Israel will forever remember this. At the same time, Netanyahu congratulated Magyar on his win, writing on X that he wished him success in leading Hungary and in strengthening ties between the two countries. He said he looked forward to continuing cooperation between Israel and Hungary for the benefit of both nations. For his part, Magyar indicated continuing friendship with Israel and zero tolerance for anti-Semitism.
Izrael és Magyarország kapcsolata kapcsán azt tudom elmondani, hogy nyilván van egy speciális viszony Izrael és Magyarország között. Rengeteg magyar honfitársunk él Izraelben, rengeteg izraeli állampolgár jön ide Magyarországra, egy nagyon erős zsidó közösség él Magyarországon, az egyik legnagyobb Európában, szerencsére békében és biztonságban. Magyarországon eddig is zéró tolerancia volt az antiszemitizmus minden formájával szemben, és ezután is ez lesz. Még olyanokat se fogunk tenni, amit az Orbán kormány tett különböző propaganda kiadványokban, és akkor azt is le is zárom, és nem mondom tovább. Egy fontos gazdasági partner Izrael, és fogunk tovább dolgozni, pragmatikus viszonyra törekszünk. Azt nem tudom garantálni, hogy persze meg kell vizsgálni minden ügyet és minden döntést, de hogy Magyarország továbbra is blokkolni fogja az Uniónak a döntéseit Izrael kapcsán. De mondom, itt nem akarok előre szaladni, meg fogjuk nézni, hogy mikor milyen döntést hoz az Unió, és mi az érdek, és mi az igazság.
When you buy from Blessed by Israel, you're not just shopping, you're standing with the families of Israel's heartland. Every bottle of delicious olive oil, handcrafted necklace, or jar of honey carries the spirit of Judea and Samaria. These, along with many more products, are the tastes, scents, and stories of the Promised Land, made by people rebuilding our biblical homeland every day. Shop now at blessedbyisrael.com and use ILTV's special code BLESSISRAEL for 10% off on your first order.
The University of Haifa stands at the forefront of global impact, ranking #1 in Israel, and has been ranked among the top 100 universities worldwide for sustainability. Here, environmental responsibility, social justice, and academic research come together to build a better future.
Haifa International also has adopted the sustainability perspective, where we take part also in high-impact work that is informed by academic research to ensure that we have a better world to live in.
From marine research in the Mediterranean to community-focused programs shaping peace and equality, students engage directly with the issues that matter.
It's not just a degree, it's an experience, and it opens your mind, your network, and your world.
Study where innovation meets purpose on a campus committed to progress, diversity, and global citizenship. Master your mind, live your Israel experience. Shape a sustainable future at Haifa International.
And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Clear skies are expected tonight around the country, with temperatures predicted at lows of 13 degrees Celsius or 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomorrow, partly cloudy skies are expected alongside hot temperatures of 29 degrees Celsius or 85 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels and keep up with us on social media. That's ILTV_Israel on all platforms. You can also catch us on Screen IL with 24/7 live coverage. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Emily Schrader. Be well, and thank you for watching.